Good afternoon and welcome. Before we begin, I would like to simply state that we respectfully acknowledge all Native American peoples who have lived on this land since time immemorial. TCU especially acknowledges and pays respect to the Wichita and affiliated tribes upon whose historical homeland our university is located. My name is Dr. Frederick Gooding Jr., aka Dr. G, and I am chair of the Race and Reconciliation Initiative at TCU. We are an academically based, research-focused initiative started in August 2020 by decree of the Chancellor and Board of Trustees, and our charge is to study TCU's relationship with slavery, racism, and the Confederacy. Now, we have actually embarked upon a 5-year plan. This is year 2 of a 5-year plan whereby we will continue to explore 3 key windows in time. The first window is the foundation years. The second window is the transition integration. And the third window is recent but related histories. We are in year 2 of a 5-year plan, and year 2 will focus on the first of these 3 windows, the foundation years, roughly 1861 to 1891. Now, last year when we began, our focus was on the African-American experience. This year, we're looking to be intentional and strategic about expanding our window horizontally so as to better include and incorporate Indigenous and Native American narratives. We, again, are an academically based research-focused initiative, simply endorsing and proposing that reconciliation is a concept that can be shared by all. But that being said, if anyone has any specific question that is outside of our purview, we will simply relay them to the appropriate parties. We would like to relate, however, that we are working directly with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion to better incorporate and institutionalize the recommendations that were given to the public on the 21st of April, 2021. And we invite you to mark your calendars now for April 20th, 2022 for a second rendition of TCU's Reconciliation Day. On that day, not only do we plan to come together so we can move forward together as a community, but we also plan to provide specific updates and accounting on where we are with respect to the institutionalization of the recommendation process. As we look at institutionalization, one last item I'd like to share with you is that rather than having the concept of reconciliation centralized, we're looking to localize the concept. Again, reconciliation is owned by no one, but it's something that can be and should be shared by all. In order to emphasize and underscore this idea, we are going around the world, if you would, going through our various 9 different colleges and our School of Medicine to provide you with a series whereby we have 5 different series, 5 different installments, whereby we have 2 different colleges paired up, providing either a staff, faculty, or staff, faculty, or student affiliate of the college, providing some sort of insight as to what does reconciliation mean to me from the college perspective, from where the individual stands, from the individual's positionality on campus. We are excited to see what reconciliation means to different people as it can take on different forms, but hopefully all spokes lead to the center of the wheel. At this point in time, before I bring on our marvelous MC, I would like to at least introduce the Dean of AddRan College, that is Dean Sonia Watson. And I also like to introduce the Dean of College Fine Arts, Dean Richard Gibson, who would like to give a few words, in the spirit of reconciliation before we bring on our specific guests. Dean Watson, Dean Gibson.
Hello. All right, good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Gooding, for spearheading this initiative. And I'd also like to thank those who've been working behind the scenes to make this happen, some of whom Dr. Karen Steele, and of course, Mr. Marcellus Perkins. So in preparation for this town hall, one of my mentors, Dr. Elizabeth Coffin, informed me of a speech made by Archbishop Desmond Tutu on truth and reconciliation. I wanted to share with you the following excerpt from his speech that helps frame our town hall discussion today. In his essay, Truth and Reconciliation, Archbishop Tutu said the following about South Africa. For our nation to heal and become a more humane place, we had to embrace our enemies as well as our friends. The same is true the world over. True enduring peace between countries, within a country, within a community, within a family, requires real reconciliation between former enemies and even between loved ones who have struggled with one another. How could anyone really think that true reconciliation could avoid a proper confrontation? After a husband and wife or two friends have quarreled, if they merely seek to gloss over their differences or metaphorically paper over the cracks, they must not be surprised when they are soon at it again, perhaps more violently than before, because they have tried to heal their ailment lightly. True reconciliation is based on forgiveness. So it's in this spirit that I share with you the diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives in the AddRan College of Liberal Arts, which are based on truth and reconciliation. Our AddRan statement on DEI, and most importantly, principles of community, reads as, AddRan College values human diversity and shares the belief that everyone has the same right to human dignity, regardless of age, race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, national origin, ethnic origin, disability, and any other basis protected by law, along with economic class, social status, professional rank, and achievements, and intellectual points of view. Next slide. So this DEI statement and principle of community that really shapes our AddRan DEI initiatives. Next slide. So I want to talk briefly about 4 of our initiatives. These aren't the only ones, but I think these are the ones that we've been working on very closely last year and of course this fall. The one initiative is our AddRan DEI cluster hire, which aims to recruit and retain a diverse community of scholars. So this year we launched the search, and in the fall, we will bring in a number of scholars in various departments, criminal justice, sociology, history, etc., to strengthen our DEI initiative, and also our course offerings on race, ethnicity, and social justice. So why is this important? Increasing the diversity of our faculty not only benefits students of color, but all students, and prepares them for an increasingly globalized and diverse world. When we think about the benefits of a cluster hire, we need to think about the benefits of the entire university and how DEI inclusion touches on every aspect of that community. Next slide. Another initiative, we have an Associate Dean of Faculty in Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, who is helping to shape DEI with regard to our faculty and of course, students. Next slide. We have a newly formed Faculty Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee that is aimed to enhance diversity at all levels in AddRan, and also to create and further a culture of inclusivity. Next slide. And I would like to throw a shout out to my colleague, Dr. Dawn Elliott. You'll hear from her today. She's an associate professor of economics, and she is our first AddRan College diversity advocate. And she has helped shape a number of initiatives with regard to DEI. Next slide. And so these are a few of her initiatives. And I want to point out a guide that she helped to put together, and it's called Better Together AddRan, Guide to Faculty Searches and Hiring. So this makes hiring and searches more equitable and inclusive. And then most recently, Dr. Elliott spearheaded an AddRan reading and speaking series, which aims to strengthen dialogue related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you. I look forward to the town hall today and to conversations on diversity, equity, inclusion. Thank you, Dr. Gooding.
Thank you, Dean Watson, for a very vigorous report. Dean Gibson.
Thank you, Frederick, and all my colleagues for this opportunity to participate in this important ongoing initiative. It's an honor and a privilege to be here to briefly introduce the two College of Fine Arts faculty colleagues on today's panel. The fine arts can and does play a critical role in efforts surrounding race and reconciliation, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion. Recognizing this, the College of Fine Arts was the first college at TCU to appoint faculty diversity advocates. We have consistently had 2 faculty members in that position for the past 5 years. We served as the model for that program institution-wide. We were also the first college, I believe, to establish a college DEI committee. The College of Fine Arts has also established a grant program that supports arts programming committed to DEI. Just this year, we have funded programming for the art galleries at TCU to present the work of Danny and Sheila Restak, which is a queer feminist imagining of alternative spaces of being, family, and creation. We also provided funding, next slide, for Sequential Self, Gender and Identity in Comics. Both those displays or gallery showings are closing at the end of the week. In music this year, the fund will support workshops and the commissioning of a new work by Quinn Mason, an incredibly talented and upcoming African-American composer, as well as bringing to campus renowned Haitian-American composer Sidney Guillaume. All told, our grant program has awarded more than a dozen grants to faculty, staff, and students over the past 3 years. Next slide. And we're extremely proud of the work done by today's 2 College of Fine Arts panelists. Dan Jian from the School of Art is responsible for working with her drawing class to complete the mural project in front of the library that came out of considerations about race and reconciliation. Next slide. And Yvonne Penn from theater, whose award-winning work For Beau, a play inspired by the murder of Botham Jean by Officer Amber Geiger, received its first public stage reading here at TCU by TCU theater students. It subsequently was named a finalist for the Eugene O'Neill 2020 National Playwrights Conference. And Yvonne's brilliant pandemic realized version presented last spring has since been selected for screening at 3 prestigious film festivals, including the Silicon Valley African Film Festival, the Gary International Black Film Festival, and our own Lone Star Film Festival here in Texas. I would like to express special thanks to Dan and Yvonne, as well as panel members, Drs. Elliott and Manning, for their participation as panelists today. Thank you for sponsoring this town hall. We look forward to exploring more ways in which College of Fine Arts faculty, staff, and students can contribute to the RRI initiative. Thank you.
And thank you, Dean Gibson. And we're very appreciative of both Dean Watson and Dean Gibson sharing a few words at the beginning, because it simply underscores the idea that this is indeed important. And so, continue along and move out the way so that we can get down to the meat of the business for this session. I would like to call to the virtual stage at this point in time one that is no stranger to any of those in the TCU universe, those who appreciate and are able to behold the marvelous, the magnificent, and the mellifluous Marcellus Perkins. Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Dr. G, for the very, very warming introduction as always. As we begin to introduce our guests, again, I want to thank you all for your time, energy, and effort for joining us for your lunch break. You could have been anywhere in the world or anywhere on Zoom, but you decided to be with us. And for that, we thank you. So as I introduce the guests and our panelists, coming from AddRan College of Liberal Arts, she is an associate professor of economics and college diversity advocate, Dr. Dawn Elliott. Dr. Brandon Manning is an associate professor of English and an interim director of Africana and African American Studies. From the College of Fine Arts, Ms. Dan Jean is an assistant professor of studio arts, and Ms. Yvonne Penn is an instructor of theater. Thank you, panelists, for joining us today. So as you all have been informed on the front end, I'll ask you all some questions. Feel free to take on whichever question you feel comfortable taking. All of you don't have to answer each question, but I would appreciate if someone answers one of them. So for the first one, kind of a very introductory question. What does reconciliation mean to you, and how does reconciliation inform your professional work?
I can begin.
Okay.
Turn off my heater here so it doesn't cause background noise. So reconciliation for me means the bringing about of harmony and balance, and with that subsequently that underscore of equity. And as far as how that influences the work that I do here at TCU and in the community, it's making sure that the scholarship that I bring into my classroom is reflective of that harmony and that balance that is a part of our world and a part of our community, making sure that diverse voices in every sense of the word, not only in the sense of race, but sexuality, thought, every realm of the word of diversity is reflected in the material that I bring into the classroom. And also as a playwright and theater artist, making sure that I am giving voice to those who have been historically marginalized.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And I can add next. I think that reconciliation for me, and at least the way that I think about it in terms of institutions and in my own work, one requires listening, a kind of active listening. Oftentimes we think of listening as being kind of passive, and you're just receiving and being receptive. But I think active listening, and I think part of active listening, like the first part, is doing your homework. Right. So often people ask me about, various issues related to Black studies, African American literature, et cetera. We live in the era of Google. And so you can kind of step into any conversation with some foundation of the knowledge that's happened in that space. And for issues around DEI and reconciliation in particular, there's generally long lists of conversations that have happened and have been documented in various spaces. And so going to do some of that homework to see what has already been said, I think is very important. And then after listening, I think acknowledging what you've heard to be true, and then addressing any contemporary or like vestiges of whatever that issue is, and then thinking about redress. So when I think of reconciliation, it kind of tackles those four main pillars: listening, acknowledging, address, and redress. Yeah, and I'll stop there.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
I'll jump in. And for me, reconciliation is an expression of faith. And so it was Dean Watson and I didn't speak about the choice of Desmond Tutu's, but I was smiling as she was reading it, because for me, it's an expression of faith in the idea that when we confront our wrongs in some kind of public way, through the RRI initiative as is happening, or, I'll reveal myself, I'm Catholic, so whether we do it through our priests, the idea is that we're doing a public confrontation of some sort, and through that process, engaging in remedial efforts in the hope that it produces forgiveness. And so that's what reconciliation means for me. And from forgiveness, the ability to move forward with unity. how that affects my work at TCU, most especially in recent years, is that as the university has embraced openly DEI initiatives and more recently the RRI initiatives within that space, my sense of personal freedom has increased. I have felt an increased freedom to be able to address topics and content in my classes that I avoided for many, many years. The sense of freedom that the university wants to see me address these things in class has been amazing for me. So now, if I teach a development class, I no longer shy away from the reality that in the US, the median wealth gap is such that a white household is 10 times wealthier than one that is a Black household. And this has racialized and it's tied to the history. And that even if you account for education levels, if we get to the top 10%, that gap is still 3 times in terms of racial differences. So with the sense of freedom that TCU is engaging on a pathway of speaking about difficult issues, I have found that my teaching has evolved to be able to take on these difficult things. I've also found that my research has evolved. So I have now become interested in questions directly related to issues of DEI. I have a paper right now under submission that a colleague of mine in econ, Dr. Hawley, that does a lot of work on discrimination, that we engage in the conversation about DEI and how do we benchmark it. And so reconciliation for me is an expression of faith in the idea that when we publicly discuss these difficult things, wrongs of the past and their continued legacy, that from that we might realize forgiveness and unity. And I don't know if that will happen, but even if that doesn't happen, what it has allowed is an increased sense of freedom that the university supports us and wants us to speak to these difficult things. And that has transformed my work here at TCU.
Thank you.
Don, that's very relatable too. For someone that is fairly new to the TCU community, reconciliation means that I, first of all, needs to learn about the very history of TCU and as well as the socioeconomic landscape of Texas and South. I'm new to TCU, but I'm also born and raised in a foreign country. So this landscape is so complex, and the history was here before me and it goes beyond me. Seeing myself here on campus, it's informative in both the work for university and personal work in terms of that realization that I'm part of the net, and it's a vital part that I can play as an instructor here on campus. Now, in professional work as an artist, I always think we are connected to our medium, where I'm a painter or a drawer, where Professor Penn is working with theater or story writing, but we can choose what subject matter that is a much more needed one at this current landscape. So in my professional work, reconciliation translate into that conscious and connection to the context of my subject matter. For instance, I study and learn about Chinese literary tradition. It's an important spiritual anchor in my work, and it's something that I both love and frustrated with. The part I love is because it's spiritual and full of metaphor and the symbolism, and what I'm frustrated with the the patriarchy that is embedded in that old school system. I think in professional work, I have to consciously deal with that and be able to recognize the context of my work is what I'm making peace of.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you all for kind of giving us our introduction and baseline. For the interest of time, I want to ask very specific questions to the panelists in hopes that you'll be able to respond. So just quickly, not quickly, but Dr. Elliott, I'm interested in how do you view your college relationship to the larger campus community?
So AddRan has about 1,400 students, and you know, if we benchmark TCU student population somewhere about 9,000 or so, I could be wrong on these numbers. It suggests that we are about 15%. We host about 15% of the student body, but probably even more interestingly, I think, is that through our essential competencies, in particular, you know, things like the written communication, we reach the entire or almost the entire TCU student body. And, you know, if we go further, you know, AddRan's liberal arts focus is a standout because while many who major within the college do not graduate with a professional degree, you know, we're unlike, for example, you know, an engineering degree or something like that. The focus on teaching students to think critically, to be able to expose them to a diverse perspective through 7 languages taught in the college, the history of the world. That kind of exposure that our students have and our ability to reach the broader student body of TCU aligns in an almost perfect way with the DEI mission and the RRI mission. And so for me, AddRan is pretty special. The focus of the liberal arts education is pretty special. There is a host of data that indicates that the long-term trajectory of folks who major in the liberal arts is quite impressive. So it takes time for people to apply these skills that they've acquired. And the skills include skills and associated with interacting with people and the history of people and the cultures of people in a very, very broad way. So I think we're pretty special college with respect to the TCU community.
Absolutely, absolutely. Professor Penn, I'm interested to know, given your work and some of the attention and acclaim that has gotten over the past 2 years, and what areas in your college are you looking to improve with your efforts and with your work?
I would say that, you know, within our college, or speaking specifically also within what I can see most tactfully and directly in our theater department, is that some of those changes are already underway, at least speaking for the theater department. As I mentioned, we have taken very pointed steps to develop our own diversity statement that's been carefully thought through, and with our faculty and staff as a whole, holding town halls with our students to hear out grievances around issues and notes of diversity, ways in which some students may have felt uncomfortable, and really taking those notes that come from those meetings and employing things like our diversity statement, like now recently a new addition to our audition forms is allowing our students to self-identify themselves or choose how they would like to identify themselves in terms of race and sexuality, so that as as we are striving to, a part of our conversation as well, having a more inclusive theater season. When we take those steps, how do we make sure we're putting casting accurately in terms of identity? So I'm very pleased and proud to say that at least in the section of the College of Fine Arts where I am working and operating with my colleagues, that this is going on 3 years of me being here, 2 years, going on 2 years full time, and that I've been able to, in that short period of time, see these manifestations come into being, and that there is that genuine desire and effort among our faculty to really hear, much like Brandon was saying, to hear and then do something about what we're hearing, taking on that role of educating ourselves and making sure that we are in the way that the theater industry now is making a heavy shift in turn to rectify a lot of the disparities between opportunities, representation, as seen on Broadway and down the ranking of theater across the country, that we are modeling that here so that when our students enter into the world, they have not been in an environment that was a bubble, but one in which they are ready to step into that new and burgeoning world of consciousness with regards to diversity in every sense of the word.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things I really appreciate about this conversation is that we're hearing how so many different disciplines can participate in this idea of reconciliation, that because of our perspective of the arts, of economics, of performance arts, fine arts, mathematics, sciences, that everything has a part to play, like a puzzle piece in this idea of reconciliation. We all have very specific outlines and strengths that fit in next to each other, not necessarily perfectly, but needed and vital. So I really do appreciate this conversation. And one thing that I know with this work, that P word gets thrown around as performative. And that's something that we constantly hear when you're trying to push the narrative or push out different works. So Dr. Manning, I'm interested from your perspective, and I do want to hear from all the panelists, how do you grapple with this idea of work or your work being seen as performative, given your background and the work that you do?
Yeah, no, it's, I think it's one of the things that I oftentimes do in class is show students the arc of various resistance movements, and they can kind of see where sometimes those levels of critique, and even in my work with satire, kind of doubles in and folds on itself. And then one of the things that we talk about very routinely is that, you have certain forms of resistance that choose to operate outside of the system in order to offer up critique and create change. And then you have other forms within the system, this kind of radical imagining of protest and resistance versus maybe a more liberal and one that works within the system. And so, I think students are extremely smart. Students recognize that, there are more abstract and ideal ways of thinking about change, but that we all live in a country that is based on capitalism, patriarchy, exploitation, white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, all of those things. And so to say that you're going to operate fully outside of those things is idyllic, but not necessarily what we can do. And so, I talk and I'm very frank with my students and introspective about what that looks like for me then at the college level, and making sure that, students recognize that there are faculty on campus that are, in meetings, that are fighting for them, that are doing this kind of work. But that, we've got to all kind of pick the battles that we're going to take on. And so it's one of those things where it's, I'm very invested in making sure that my students, especially my students of color and students from marginalized communities, are able to go out into the world, like Ivan said, and recognize that, you know, they're walking into spaces that are very conscious, but that they're going to ultimately have to pick how and when they show up, and that they need to show up, but just in ways that that are healthy for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that you said that I found very interesting is that sometimes the work can be seen as abstract. And I think sometimes when it is seen as abstract, it people that don't understand it, they miss it or they misinterpret it of this being actual useful materials. And so I want to ask this question to Professor Jin in regards to the arts and sometimes art being very abstract. How do you, as an artist, kind of also grapple with this idea of work being performative and sometimes being misunderstood? Because a lot of time our art is our storyline, our art is our voice. When we're telling these stories through color, through drawing, through paints, through photography. So how would you answer that or respond to that question?
The short answer to me is get over it. I think that life, no matter what you do, is going to have certain aspect of dilemma, and there's always going to be an element of doubt. The doubt from yourself, doubt from audience, doubt that a bridge didn't get built or a message didn't get crossed. And it does happen too. So what? The work still need to be done in increments. No one can do anything. So if you're holding a heroic expectation, for instance, Dr. Gibson brought up Danny and Sheila's queer performance and art exhibition on campus, and they're talking about queer fertility. What if a lesbian couple wants to have a child? Those are perhaps a topic that not many people really, if they're heterosexual, not come across their head, right? And it is abstract, and it is a private, domestic, all those sensitive topic. Then so what? Do the work, show it, and if the first connection failed, then try again and fail again and fail better next time. Unless we keep putting ourselves out there, nothing's gonna happen, right?
Yeah.
And also just accept the fact that there's always gonna be only a small percentage of audience coming along with you, and that's okay. Having 1 out of 100 come along with you, you still gain something than not doing the work. Yeah, so
No,
get
I
over
think
it.
that's great. And I like the way you kind of ended it. I read this book not too long ago. We Do This Till We Free Us by Maramia Kaba. And she says that hope is a discipline. In
Right.
that hope is not a feeling and it does not preclude frustration, disappointment. Those things happen. But if you commit every day to do the work, then you'll have those progressions slowly but surely. But hope has to be a discipline. It cannot be a feeling. So I definitely think the work that we do in order when combating this idea of your work being performative is that it is ours to say that hope is a discipline, not a feeling.
I think just add on what you're saying. Sorry, just
yeah, no, go ahead.
I think you just brought up a different aspect of looking at it. It's a work for yourself. Like we as artists or performer or writer or teacher, we do our work because there's a small segment that is self-healing. So no matter what other people seeing, remain that inner connection is, I think, a lot of time the fuel that keeps us going.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to kind of transition into DEI at TCU, and this question is open to anyone, and then I'll have a more targeted question for the second one. But what did you think of when you first heard RRI, and how did you hear it? And this could be an honest question. Dr. G, myself, Dr. Steele, we'll be okay if you say that you were kind of cause for concern, because we were as well, because we weren't sure what the direction was, but open to you all.
But quickly, did Avam just raise your hand to say something? Sorry.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I couldn't see. Yes, Professor Penn.
If we need to move on, it's fine. I was
No,
going to
no.
speak to the performative bit.
No, go ahead, please, please.
It's interesting that this question is being raised here because when I shared the poster for this event on social media, someone literally asked me that. It was someone who was from outside of TCU asking, basically, and how genuine do you think this is? Is this a performance? So my answer that I would have for that is it's only as performative as we allow it to be. From the outside looking in, how do people know whether it's genuine or not? It's if the tree is bearing fruit. Okay, are we sitting around and talking all the time, or are we actually seeing action steps, as is the buzz phrase at this time? Are we seeing action steps that are happening when we check in with our students? Are they feeling pushed outside of their comfort zone? Are they, if they previously at another time had felt uncomfortable at some point, how are they feeling at this juncture? Really race and reconciliation. If I am forthcoming, I found out from a professor outside of the theater department that one of our students had been called a racial slur on campus within the first week of school. And my heart dropped. Okay. Now, can we control everyone's mouth and body and attitude? No, but we are this, which should be a fertile ground that when these little seedlings come along to TCU, they ought to sprout up something a little different, a little more conscious as we are trying to have. And so it sounds like from my colleagues here that we're all striving to do the work in the classroom as well. It's just so important. Is it performative? Are we seeing fruits of our labor, or are we just talking? And it's our job to make sure that the fruit comes to bear.
Yes, absolutely. No, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for including that. And I think that kind of allows us to transition back to the question again is, what were some of your first thoughts when you heard of RRI? What were your kind of inceptions? What did you think this was? Because the performative word was thrown around a lot, and we did have to define and kind of set down some type of foundation and grounding of this is what the work is and this is what the work is not. So for you,
I'll jump in.
yes.
I thought, oh my gosh, no. So I'm sorry, but
No, it's
probably,
okay.
And I'm probably one of those that also worry about things being genuine and sustainable and not opportunistic, that right now everybody is talking about this. So if we're not talking about it, then we're somehow failing because everybody else is. Yeah. So I too worry about that. And I don't think it's a bad thing to worry about. I think we all have to continually check ourselves when we're doing anything. And so I worried about it, but I'll tell you another reason that I worry about this. And when I heard about the race and reconciliation effort is because for me, as I said before, I see it as an expression of faith. And the idea then that when we engage in the activities that we're engaging in, that these will create reconciliation. It's a difficult idea. And I don't think even as we do the work, we should lose sight of it. I found a couple of research papers yesterday. I was looking through it, and there was a pretty prominent one done on South Africa. And they were asking the question whether confronting difficult pasts did indeed result in reconciliation, forgiveness, a sense of unity. And the work suggested that perhaps not. And so for me, this was the difficulty, is when we do this work, will it produce the sort of forgiveness and peace and unity that we hope it would? So at first I was quite, sort of resistant to the idea, but over time, I've sort of changed my benchmark. And by changing my benchmark, I've become very proud of the work. And the way I changed my benchmark was to say, well, I'm not even sure if we can know whether reconciliation has occurred or not. I don't know if we can. However, if I change the benchmark and I ask myself, well, when we engage in these kinds of conversations and these kinds of activities, does it create change in how we work at TCU? And does it create positive change? And so for me, the answer is absolutely, because now I am interacting in my role as teacher and scholar and in the administrative role I did as college diversity advocate. Now I'm intentionally working in a way that promotes, I think, positive outcomes precisely because of the RRI and DEI efforts, because it gives me a confidence that even if I don't know if reconciliation will occur, I do know that by teaching differently, by engaging in service differently, by engaging in administrative work differently, all around the idea of inclusiveness and building a space where people might feel as if they too belong, then if that happens, then, and I have experienced it happening, then I think it's been extraordinary. And so now I'm very happy to be a part of it, whereas in the beginning I was unsure.
No, and I think that's fair. I think that for us, what we've learned is that there's care in the critique. There's also concern in the critique, and all of it is valid. And it's coming from a place of, we want this work to be beneficial, not necessarily a Band-Aid fix. So no, I appreciate that. And I really thank you for your answer. Dr. Manning, I saw a lot of head nods from you as well. I'm interested to hear from your perspective. You know, what were some of your first thoughts when you heard of RRI, and how did you hear of it?
Yeah, no, I think I heard about murmurings of it very early on. And I remember how important the summer of 2020 was on campus, you know, and off campus, really. And so I was interested in the work, but I think that for those who I think have been on universities for any extended amount of time or are committed to social justice work, you kind of generally move maybe pragmatically or nihilistically into certain spaces. And so I definitely had my reservations. Like Dawn, you know, there was a lot of public genuflecting and performative aspects of things that were happening in corporate landscapes, political landscapes. I mean, didn't senators like take a knee with kente cloths? That was a moment that we were in, right? And so I bring that up to say that, you know, I definitely have my reservations. And I think to a point that Don made earlier, you know, I think so much of this is about a sustained kind of conversation. I was happy and I realized that this wasn't going to be just an annual thing, like, whoop, we did it at the 1 year kind of mark, and that this is going to hopefully like carry on kind of sustained conversations for the community. I also know that universities as a whole usually are very invested in time and really like the dichotomy of like power and oppression, like entities that can use time to their benefit. And so we're in a space where student turnover is like every 4 or 5 years. And so universities can be slow with these things, and it's very hard to quantify what progress looks like, right? Because the same students that brought up initial issues and injuries are no longer present. And so yeah, I mean, it's kind of my I've been watching and looking, and have been happy with the conversations that have started.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to transition into one of my favorite parts of this session is the rapid fire piece. So I want to ask you all a quick question. You have about 10 seconds or less to respond, but these are just to be fun questions. So the first one, and because you were the last person to answer, Dr. Manning, I'll pitch it right back to you. If TCU were a song, what best song fits for you?
let's see, a song. Yeah, I will go with, I'm a big Outkast fan.
Okay.
I'm originally from Atlanta.
Okay.
And so we are back on campus right now. I will be optimistic right now. And we are so fresh and so clean. And so I will give us Outkast, So Fresh. And So Clean.
Okay. I like that. Dr. Elliott, if TCU was a song, what song is it for you?
Oh gosh, I thought you were going to give me a different question. So at first I thought of thinking about it and then I couldn't. So, you know, I can't beat Brandon's, right? How can I? So I can only, I can't come up with anything. I can only tell you that I draw my inspirations from two singers, Jamaican singers. I'm from Jamaica, Jimmy Cliff and Bob Marley. And so maybe I'd go with a Jimmy Cliff. He tends to be quite optimistic. He has several songs about, you know, that I can't think of the names now.
Okay.
I can't think of the names now.
Okay. There's plenty of Bob Marley songs as well. So I'm pretty sure someone in the audience can attest to that. Professor Penn, this is one of a typically favorite question that we found. If you were chancellor for a day, what would you change first?
Oh my goodness. If I were chancellor for a day, what would I change first? That 2-day fall break.
He's next door to me, so I'll make sure he knows that next time. Professor Zin, for you, if you were chancellor for the day, what are you changing? Yes.
I think, can I give everybody a raise?
Everyone a raise. Agreed upon.
I think we are a little bit overworked and we could use a little higher cap.
Fair enough. So I appreciate you all engaging in some of those questions. I know they kind of caught you off guard. I want to give the next 2 minutes for any of the panelists to have any closing thoughts or comments before I bring Dr. G back on to close us out. If you all have any closing thoughts that you would like to share.
I'm just really excited that these conversations are being sustained and that especially in AddRan and across the university, we've got cluster hires. I think it's really important that students can kind of feel at home in their major disciplines. And so I'm hoping that some of the work that happens with these cluster hires will allow them to do exactly that so that we can move towards this space of forgiveness that Don so eloquently brought up earlier.
Absolutely.
I really want to thank you all, especially Dr. G and Marcellus, that the work that you put in is so important. And I'm with Brandon that the consistency and the sustainability of a program like this, I hope higher up will hear this as well, is more important than a monumental one-time movement, or it's the continuity of this conversation that really eventually trickles down to make a difference.
Absolutely. Thank you.
For all those involved in the RRI and these initiatives, that MIT event lately has been on my mind where, and I don't know if everybody's followed it, but I hope that one of the difficult parts of all of these efforts to address those who believe that pursuing equity is unethical and potentially has legal issues because it no longer fulfills the spirit of equality. This was a language that came out of the MIT concern. I hope we find a way and can find a way to address those concerns as well, to address the idea that some have that once upon a time, we violated the notions of equality by coming up with all kinds of ways to exclude some groups. And presumably now we're violating the notions of equality by creating opportunities for certain groups. So some people see targeting, whether for the purposes of exclusion, as has been done for so long, or for the purposes of inclusion, as problematic around the idea of equality. I think this is a real challenge to the efforts of RRI and DEI. And I hope that, since as a university, this is part of what we do, we think about difficult things and we attempt to figure out pathways through them, that we might be able to contribute to a conversation that is able to adequately and properly address those kinds of concerns, if we hope to truly have the sort of reconciliation that we hope is possible. I don't know if I've expressed that well, but that MIT story has been on my mind.
Absolutely. Thank you. Professor Penn, did you want to close us out?
Yes, briefly. Thank you for that, Dawn. Absolutely. And looping back to what Dan said earlier about even if it's one person that's brought along out of hundreds or thousands, I certainly am optimistic that our numbers will be better than that. But just keeping it real, there are in classrooms that that I've been a part of, there can be individuals, and well, Dawn, period, just mentioned, there are some people who dig in heels. And thank you to the facilitators of this event, this initiative, the long-standing nature of it, that good on all of us for coming together to do the work, regardless of some individuals who want to dig in heels. Because one thing that I can testify to in every classroom is that whereas there may be one or two individuals who express some resistance, usually there's more people than not whose eyes are opened and actually actively wants to take action steps to make our campus community and our community at large a better place. So thank you.
Absolutely. So panelists, again, thank you to our deans, Dean Gibson, Dean Watson, also a Virginia native. How you doing? Just want to thank you all for being here and contributing in this way. I'll turn it over for Dr. G for lasting thoughts and closing us out.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins, and thank you to all of our panelists and to the deans for absolutely participating in the process of reconciliation. We hope that a panel like this will continue to provide perspective, deepen understanding, and hopefully push us forward and toward action and healing, or in other words, reconciliation. Indeed, as I mentioned earlier, progress is indeed a process. I mean, I really appreciated what the panelists said, in particular, Professor Penn, talk about skeptical. Hell, I'm still skeptical, right? And I'm the chair. And for good reason. We should continue to be skeptical. We should continue to ask critical questions in terms of how good are we doing in implementing the theory. It's nice to talk theory, but the question remains, how are we implementing the theory into actual practice in the day-to-day? As Professor Manning had mentioned, we have a turnover, but how are we being as consistent as possible? And so when we talk about changes on the horizon, I'm pleased to tell you that after this homecoming weekend, if you go by the DJ Kelly Center, it will be absolutely transformed for the better. On the heels or on the shoulders of the portrait project as started by faculty and staff, in AddRan, we're been able to, on the strength of Dr. Sylviane Greensward, because again, I do have what I call STEAM team, as we know, we got to have full STEAM, baby. We're pushing this reconciliation train down the track. So we have a STEAM team. There's myself, Dr. Karen Steele, Mr. Marcellus Perkins, Dr. Sylviane Greensward, who's our RRI fellow, and Miss Amy Seneceros. But through Dr. Greensward's work in the oral history project portion of the RRI, we're now going to unveil a portrait to Jennifer Giddings Brooks. She was the first Black elected homecoming queen in 1970. It's taken time, as in over half a century, but it's never too late to embark upon the path of reconciliation. And so if you're going to be at the game, be on the lookout to see her go on the field and be honored. And again, if you think it's hard for Leslie Ekpe as the first Black graduate student president or for Mr. Laurent Honeycutt as the first Black SJ president, if you think it's hard for them now in 2021, we'll just think what it was like for her back in 1970. So we're very appreciative. We're very appreciative also Office of Diversity and Inclusion for the Diversity Day Conference, and also the Native American Indigenous Peoples Day Symposium. These are indeed receipts that demonstrate that many people, good people, are doing good works to continue pushing us along the path towards reconciliation. So again, at the end of the day, party people, we cannot promise what will happen as a result of our efforts for reconciliation. But we do pledge this, that we are doing the best we can with what we have. Until next time.